When I turned 18, I figured it'd be best to move out on my own. It isn't like I had family problems or anything like that. I really just wanted to start my life as an adult. I'd often daydream about throwing crazy parties, being able to hook up without having to find a spot, always having beer in the fridge, and basically just having a ridiculous amount of freedom. So, the summer after high school, I found this small apartment complex on the south side of town. It wasn't anything fancy. 5 apartments to a floor, 3 floors per building, and 7 buildings spaced out along a horseshoe-shaped road, with some woodland surrounding it. My apartment wasn't very big. Being fresh out of high school, and working a low-end job as a waiter, I could only score a small studio apartment. I was fortunate enough to snag one on the 3rd floor, so I didn't have any upstairs neighbors. I planned on going to college, but as some people know, things don't always work out that way. After the fall semester had started and I hadn't enrolled, I started doing double shifts at work to keep myself busy. Living alone in a studio apartment can really take a mental toll on you. Seriously, it can. Sitting around all day doing absolutely nothing, waiting to go to work, can get really old after a while. Not to mention most of my friends ran off to schools out of state, and I was the one left behind. I'm not throwing a pity party for myself. I'm just saying that's how the situation was. Anyway, I'd work these doubles all day. They were roughly 10-hour shifts, depending on how busy the restaurant was. I'd come back home super late at night, way past when the sun had gone down. I had to walk through the giant horseshoe back to my apartment that sat all the way on the other end. At that point in time, I realized college was out of reach for me, so I started saving all my money for a new car. I kept most of my tip money in a large box under my bed, and when I'd come home, I'd pull it out, throw the money in, and then go to sleep. Well, that was always my intention. The problem is, since I'd be working so much, and being just a kid, I always wanted to try and get in some personal time by watching television, playing video games, or just throwing on one of my favorite movies. I'd usually be able to stay up all night doing it, crush about 4 hours of sleep, then wake up, rinse, and repeat. After so long, I couldn't do this anymore. Mainly because I had to cancel my cable in order to pay rent, as well as pawn off my gaming system and DVD player. It really sucked for me. Movies and television had been my life. I wanted to go to school to study them, but being an adult always has its costs. Still, even if I had nothing to do, I couldn't stay asleep. I'd stay up all night, smoking a ridiculous amount of cigarettes, and just stare out my window in the middle of the night. Where I'm from, some crazy lightning storms pass through from time to time, especially in the late summer or early fall. I just watched those all the time. Having nothing to do really opened my eyes to my surroundings. I'd watch the lights on the other apartments go out. I knew my neighbor's bedtime, which sounds sinister, but I'd never act on anything like that. I knew all the people who liked to get a late night smoke in. I knew how many people liked to drive over to the Taco Bell past midnight in order to get a late night snack. I also knew that the entire complex became a ghost town at around 2 in the morning. There'd be absolutely nothing going on. It'd just be me, either staring out my window or smoking on my balcony. One night, I decided to take a walk. I did laps around the horseshoe and was listening to an old iPod shuffle. I remember it being a rather cool night, and I wore an old hoodie with the hood up. I probably looked extremely suspicious, but honestly, I was just out for a walk. I followed this massive iron fence that wrapped around the entire complex. I was heading back home when I came across something really weird. It was a gate. It led off into the woods that surrounded the complex. I found it rather weird. I mean, the place was gated, but to have this weird gate on the side of the complex was odd. Not to mention it led absolutely nowhere. It gave me chills to see that the gate was open. I stared off into the darkness of the surrounding woodlands, hoping to see if anybody was out there, or maybe if someone just forgot to shut it. I don't know. I kept moving. Luckily, I could see the gate from my apartment, and I decided I had a new game to play. Who opens the gate? After coming home from work, I placed my tips in my box, went to my window and stared out and looked for the gate. I could see it from my apartment. It was just really hard to notice. There weren't any streetlights around the damn thing, and it honestly looked like it wasn't even there. The gate was shut, and when it was shut, it blended into the fence perfectly. Nobody could know it was there unless they found the thing open, which I had. I didn't bother to tell anybody because, well, I didn't think it was a big deal. To be honest, I thought someone was going out there to smoke a bowl or fill some weird public sex fantasy or something. I didn't really care what was going on behind there, but I needed something to do to pass my late night hours. So I'm sitting on my balcony, and it's way past 2 a.m. at this point. I'm the only thing awake in the complex as far as I'm concerned, and I'm just smoking away on a pack of Times. I'm starting to get tired, and I figured I'd call it a night, when I heard the squeaking sound of the iron gate. The metal sounded rusted, and it was rather loud from what I remember, but this was all a long time ago. I lowered myself down, trying to hide myself amongst the shadows of my balcony. I didn't want to spook whoever was going into the trees. I squinted my eyes, trying to get a good picture. I could see a shadow moving along the darkness of the tree line, but I soon realized that whoever it was wasn't coming from the apartment complex. They were coming in. My first thought was that it was a person who maybe worked on the other side of the forest and had used a shortcut to get through. I had never seen it happen before, but maybe I had just discovered a new routine of one of my neighbors. I thought that, until my eyes adjusted properly to the darkness around the gate. Whoever came from those trees wasn't a person that lived in my complex. They were physically handicapped, I think. They hunched their back a bit. Their arms swayed back and forth, dangling like they were lifeless. The knees of the person were bent low to the ground, lower than I could possibly imagine someone getting and still being able to walk. The movement of their body was just haunting, I guess is the right word. The sight of it alone stopped my heart. I couldn't tell the gender of the person, but they did have medium-length hair that covered a portion of their face. The person moved away from the gate, flailing around in a disturbing manner. They were mumbling to themselves, loud enough that I could hear it. I couldn't understand what they were saying, but to be honest, it just sounded like a bunch of gibberish. I figured whoever this was extremely disturbed. I held my breath as I watched the person move from behind the building across from mine, towards the one right next to it. They stayed away from the streetlights that lined the horseshoe-shaped drive. They moved through the shadows, as if trying to avoid being detected. I didn't move an inch. I just watched as they started to make their way to a building. As it made its way towards the front of the building, it looked over its shoulder, and in doing so, they looked right at me. I don't know how they saw me, but I know that they did. They were pretty far away, and it was dark, but I swear to God I saw their eyes widen, and then they scurried off into the darkness. They didn't stand, they didn't change anything about their posture. In that weird low walk they entered with, they rushed off faster than most people could run. I blinked a few times because I couldn't believe it at first, but then I heard the gate slam shut, and I knew it really did fucking happen. I didn't sleep at all that night. I felt like shit the next morning, and had to call in for the morning part of my work shift. I wasn't able to sleep until early afternoon after the sun came up, and finally went to work. I ended up having to stay late because one of my tables stuck around after we closed, just to have a few more drinks with the manager who they were friends with. I scored a $50 tip out of it alone, so I wasn't complaining. When I got home, I went to stash my money in my box. I opened it up, and inside all of my cash remained, but a note read in some of the worst handwriting I'd ever seen. "I saw you watching me." My heart stopped. How the fuck did they know my room number? How did they get in? I freaked out and started wondering if they might still be around. Being a studio apartment, they didn't have a lot of places to hide, so I checked under my bed, in the closet, and in my bathroom. They were long gone. I took a peek out my window and saw the gate closed. However, the brush of the woodland swayed back and forth, as if someone was moving about within. I freaked and called the police. It took them a bit to get there, and when they did, it seemed like the whole complex came alive. All the lights came on, and everyone came out to see what the disturbance was. When I told the officers what had happened, they made me feel like I was an idiot. They didn't believe me at all. I told them where the gate was. I was too freaked out to go down there and show them myself. When they went to look, sure enough, the gate was there. The two went searching for the person, while two more stayed back to take my statement on the whole matter. When the two cops came back, they didn't seem to want to talk about it at first, but they were as pale as ghosts. When one of the officers that stayed back to take my statement pressed them, they finally opened up. They said they didn't find anybody, but they did find a bunch of personal items hung up in various trees around the forest. They thought it was weird, and they began asking all my neighbors if they were missing anything. Sure enough, people in the buildings that lined the damn iron fence where the gate stood were missing all sorts of things, but they weren't anything of value. Pictures inside of frames, a hairbrush, some books, things like that. They were odd things for someone to just steal. The people of the complex were creeped the hell out. I mean, I saw at least 5 moving trucks the next week. People just wanted to get out of there, and I didn't blame them. The owners of the complex came in and sealed the gate shut using a blowtorch. Turns out, they had no idea it was even there in the first place. They didn't put it in. I got out of Dodge when I had the chance. I didn't do my nightly routines anymore, but I sure as hell still couldn't sleep. I left all my lights on, and my electricity bill was getting a bit on the high side because of it. I couldn't afford to live in the place much longer anyway. I moved back to the north side of town, in a cheaper complex that wasn't surrounded by woodland. I still have nightmares about the whole ordeal, and I often wonder who the hell that person was, and what they wanted with all the random stuff they stole. It still freaks me out that they just wandered off into the woods, and I never saw them again. It all started over a year ago, living in my current small neighborhood. It was unusually hot in our house for October, and my sister figured it'd be a good idea to keep her window open for a bit of air. She was doing her homework, and I was getting ready for bed, when suddenly she bursts into my room. She frantically says she heard some noises outside, the sounds of leaves crunching under a person's steps. I believed it to be an animal, so I walked into her room and stayed there for not more than 5 minutes, until I heard the leaves crunching as well. We glanced out the window, only to hear the sound of something running away into the woods. But that wouldn't be the end of this story. During the winter, I enjoyed exploring the woods towards the back of my home, climbing trees and traveling further back to the fields. I remembered the events very clearly. It had just snowed that night, the first snowfall of winter, and I was more than excited to head out there. I did so and climbed my usual tree to have a look out. I gave a cursory glance around me and at the ground when I noticed something strange. Footsteps leading away from our house. This wouldn't be weird as long as the front of the footsteps didn't end pointing straight at my house, and the origin of them came from a seemingly long-off start. I tracked them down up to a point where there was a rusty wire fence covered in snow, where they suddenly disappeared. In October of 2017, it started up again. I was laying in my bed, pitch dark, not a light shining through my room, when I heard it. My doorknob turning, and my door creaking open. My heart stopped. Every single possibility of what it was rushing through my head. Keep in mind, my door is always shut when I go to sleep. Since I was covered by my blanket, I quickly shot my sister a text. "Did you just come in my room?" She replied with a sharp, "No, I'm all the way in Hilliard." My heart began pumping fast. I slowly snuck my hand under my pillow and grabbed my baton. I sent a text to my dad and waited. My dad came in mere minutes later with a knife, shot on the lights, and I jumped out of bed. We searched the entire house but found nothing. The alarm was set, and all the doors were locked. Impossible. There's no way that happened otherwise. My dad and mom were asleep, and a cat would have opened it much faster if it jumped at the doorknob. You best believe I didn't sleep a second that night. Fast forward to December. My relatives in town were staying for a week in the basement. We turned on the alarm and all headed to sleep. I stayed up gaming. In the morning, at around 2:30 or 3, estimated since I wasn't aware of what had transpired, my uncle slowly opened his eyes. He told me he had a feeling of being watched. His eyes adjusted a bit to the dark before he saw it. A man with average height, scrawny with his hair flowing in the wind and shivering, looking inside their room through the window. My uncle screamed and they grabbed their baby before taking off upstairs. That morning I was informed what had happened. I looked for footprints and saw only the smallest sign. A front toe print made from what I could only assume was a sneaker. My uncle gave me more details without me telling him I had looked for footprints, and he said the man was leaning to the left looking in. The footprint matched his story. The left side had a thin line of dirt. Anyone could have shimmied across. Now that leads to tonight. The night I could swear he or whatever it was had been in our house. I couldn't sleep. Life had been pretty stressful lately, and I was pretty much up all night until I tried getting rest. Every night I've had a string of Christmas lights dimly light up the room until tonight. I figured the lights must have been interfering with my sleep, so I unplugged them and headed off to bed. Pillow over my head, I started to drift off until it happened. A quick strum of my guitar and the sound of something falling over with a desperate attempt to stop it from hitting the ground filled the room. The sound ignited my heart rate, saliva developing at extreme speed. It was hard not to swallow. I could feel the presence of someone in my room. Realizing I left my baton on my desk, I did the next logical thing, to pretend I was asleep. I tried and laid there for what felt like hours. In reality, it was only a few minutes, till I heard a whimper come from my sister's room. Imagining this may be the horrible day everyone in my family but me was silently murdered, I gathered up all the courage I had. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and grabbed my baton. I busted into my sister's room and screamed, only to see that she was unharmed. My sister asked me what the hell I was doing, and I just stood there looking into the pitch black of my room and cried. I've never in my life felt the overwhelming emotion of believing my family was going to be taken from me until today. I sit here in my chair writing this in hopes to document my experiences and try to come up with some kind of logical conclusion. All I can come up with is that there's some man stalking my family and perhaps sneaking into our rooms at night. In 2008, a routine visit to my friend's farm changed the way I lived my life, a life full of paranoia and suspicion. As a preface, I'd like to clarify I was never in any harm. The antagonist of this story went on to be a registered sex offender around last year. I am Jonas. I was born in 1996 and befriended a lifelong friend in preschool named Sammy. This friendship years later would test through a traumatic event in our lives. On the 4th of June, 2008, around 7 days before my birthday, I visited my best friend at his farm. This had become routine over the years, because I rarely ever get to see him as he lived 2 hours away from me. His parents had left for a dinner date with mine. Unfortunately, he had no gaming consoles, back then when the GameCube was the shit, and only had a trampoline and a Game Boy Color with Pokemon. Of course, I was enthralled by this. Time passes and it's around 9:30 p.m. He darts off to the bathroom, but frankly, I didn't pay attention. I was lying down with the Game Boy Color being suspended over my head. I proceeded to adjust myself so I was sitting with my knees up and my back against the bed's backboard. As I transitioned seating positions, I glanced into the opposing cupboard doors, which were inbuilt, to see a red object quickly pass by the crack in the door. Unfortunately, my best friend wore a red onesie because we were hard cunts, so I thought nothing of it and assumed he crawled to the cupboards while I was so intently focused on the game. For some reason, now that I think about it, this red figure was almost 5'10", and we were both a measly 5'4", but this didn't budge my focus. I became tired of the 4-hour Pokemon binge, so I placed the Game Boy Color down and cracked my neck. As I roll my neck to the side, I focus on the crack and start to make out distinctive facial features. Thick eyebrows and wide nostrils, nothing like my friend. But then I heard something that would cause me to be on the verge of a breakdown in tears. I could hear my best friend in the bathroom, brushing his teeth. I was paralyzed. I didn't want to make obvious my immediate panicked state. I picked up the Game Boy and started to pretend to play it, at times glancing to the stream of light through the crack of the cupboard door. My friend runs in and startles me. My heart races as I see he isn't heading towards the bed. He's sliding along the cupboard doors. When he gets to the crack, a hand reaches out and grabs him and drags him in. All I can hear is his screams of terror and unrelenting kicks opening the cupboard doors and revealing a ginger boy in his late teens. He was 17 at the time. He had his arms wrapped around my friend's neck, trying to choke him. I panicked and started to cry. All I could do was muster a measly throw of the Game Boy Color. It managed to hit the boy in the side of his head, and he collapsed with a gasp of pain. Clearly dazed and confused, he stumbled out of the room, and I heard him fall down the stairs. The big wooden door of the house's entry slammed shut. I ran to my friend who was crying and in desperate need for a hand, so I helped him up. He was shocked and hyperventilating, so I did what any 12-year-old would do. I cried with him, loudly. We didn't know the phone numbers of our parents, and we had never called the police before, so it never crossed our minds at the time. Later, when our parents arrived, I bolted down the stairs and ran to my dad and hugged him. Meanwhile, my friend remained upstairs crying. They called the police immediately, as on their way back they had seen someone running through their farm. The following week, we found out it was the neighbor who lived in the farm over. He had intended to steal some game cartridges for our Game Boy Color, but had gotten there just as I had arrived, so he waited for around 6 hours in the cupboard, watching us and waiting for us to move. In 2014, he molested a 6-year-old child and flashed himself to a group of 14-year-old girls at a party he had crashed. When I look back and remember his face, he honestly looked like he intended to kill or badly injure my friend. There was something about his dark, empty eyes. He never confessed to anything other than breaking and entering and assault. He was let off with a restraining order and never bothered either of us since. So before I begin, perhaps a bit of background information would help you understand my story. I'm a 20-year-old male, living in the Netherlands, and I've been a geek all my life. Games in particular have always played a major role in my life, starting when I got my first PlayStation when I was 5 years old. Something about gaming just always got me, be it mechanically or in terms of storytelling. I could always find something to love about it. As I grew older, I started to get more and more into RPGs, and eventually found my way onto World of Warcraft. As I got more involved in the game, I started joining raiding guilds. For those of you who don't know, it's basically a group of players who intend to face the game's hardest content as a team. The second guild I joined was the greatest bloody team of people I had met thus far. One of those people was a Swedish girl who was around my age. She was named Maggie. We got along nicely. As it turned out, her mom, who was also in this guild, was actually living in the Netherlands, so we'd often end up in conversations where she asked me to teach her some Dutch, and she'd teach me some Swedish in return. It was all good fun. Fast forward to the beginning of 2013. The aforementioned guild had fallen apart a while back, and I had joined a new one. I stayed in touch with some people in the old guild, but Maggie really hadn't been online all that much. When she did get back online, we quickly caught up. It turned out she had actually moved in with her mother, and had been spending the last couple of months improving her Dutch and attending a high school. She also started dating this guy called William, who was actually part of the same guild I had met Maggie in. He always struck me as a nice guy. Other guild members always thought he was a bit too direct and perhaps rude, but being Dutch, I understood that was just simply how our culture worked, so I was always okay with it. June comes around. Me and Maggie recently finished our final exams, and we're waiting for the results to come back in. One afternoon while we were playing online, I suggested a meetup between the two of us. I really didn't have much to do, and given that she had voiced her concerns about finding her footing in Dutch social circles, I figured this was a nice opportunity to take our first baby steps into the country. She excitedly agreed and asked if she could bring William as well. Obviously, I said yes, seeing as he was her boyfriend. Meetups are safer when you arrive as a couple, and meeting former guild members was something I was looking forward to anyway. A couple of days later, I met both of them in Rotterdam, and we all had a great day. I showed them around the city since I knew it best. We had some nice conversations, a few laughs, and we ended the day by taking a trip to the Euromast. Before leaving, Maggie had to go to the bathroom, so me and William were waiting outside together. Striking a conversation, I said to him, "You two make for a nice couple." "Thanks," he replied. I freaking loved her, you know. Honestly wouldn't know what to do without her at this stage. Back then, I didn't think much of that statement. It was just a thing people say when they're in love, so kudos to him, right? Maggie got out of the restroom, and we said our goodbyes and we parted ways. A few weeks later, we got our exam scores back. I had passed high school with flying colors, but Maggie wasn't so lucky. She had failed most of her exams. She told me she was going to be studying for the rest of the summer in order to properly prepare for her rerun of the last year of high school. I told her that if she needed any help, that I was willing to see what I could do, even when I was going to college. She was very thankful, and assured me that she'd let me know if she needed any help. Fast forward again to September. After our last conversation, Maggie had practically disappeared off of the internet. She hadn't logged into World of Warcraft. She was never on Skype and wasn't even online on Facebook anymore. I had asked William in mid-August how she was doing, and he assured me she was fine, so I thought nothing of it. I even admired her focus on her education. However, during my second week in college, all of that changed. I got into the metro and picked up a free newspaper in the seat next to me, just to pass the time. I vividly remember turning to the 4th page to read a headline saying, "Swedish woman, 19, from city, stabbed in own backyard." It took me a few seconds to even realize that she lived in that city now, and that she was 19. Even though the article didn't mention a name, I began to grow very concerned. I quickly sent her a text message, as we'd exchanged phone numbers when we met up. I wanted to ask her if she was okay. The rest of the day went by, and I heard nothing from her. I eventually figured that if anything had happened to her, people would likely start posting things on her Facebook page. Concerned and scared of what I was going to find, I started typing her name into the search bar for Facebook. Sure enough, it was already filling with messages from people who had heard she had passed away from her injuries. After inquiring with some of the other former guild members, it turned out William had stabbed her. She had broken up with him after she had gotten her horrendous test results back, and he wasn't all too pleased with that. In the aftermath of the incident, me and some other Dutch guild members went to her city to meet up with her friends from school. We attended the memorial set up in her school and put some flowers at the scene of the crime on behalf of everyone she had played the game with. When we met up with Maggie's school friends, we found out William hadn't been half as nice as we all thought he was. During the relationship, he had been very controlling of Maggie, and after the breakup, he began stalking her and sending her threatening messages. She even went to the police to report it, but they told her they couldn't do anything for her at that stage. After that, she met a different guy and started dating him. William found out and, well, he took matters into his own hands. Thinking back at this, the worst part of this all just came to mind. When we put flowers at the scene of the crime, we stood around for a few minutes. We didn't know whether or not we should knock on the door and personally give her mother our condolences, given that she was our friend as well. We decided against it, given that we might unintentionally remind her that Maggie's online connections were what ultimately cost her her life. As soon as we got back to her car, I saw Maggie's front door open. Out of the door came her mother, with Maggie's younger sister. I knew at the time that Maggie had a younger sister, but I didn't know that she was only 6 or 7. I lost it when I saw her little head hanging down while grabbing hold of her mother, scared to go around the corner to face all of the drawings and flowers people had left there. In writing this post, I found a recent article that said William would be going to prison for 20 years most likely. Honestly, I hope he never makes it out of there. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here as always. I just wanted to thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. I have a little bit of an update here for you guys. I've recently started streaming a little bit on Twitch. I don't know if you guys are interested in just hanging out and seeing a bit of gameplay of maybe Monster Hunter or some games like that, maybe a few horror games, but I'll leave a link to my Twitch in the description of the video below. As always, if you guys like the video, please leave a comment or perhaps like or subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you'd like to message me, or you'd like to send in a story for me to read, or you have a suggestion for a story I should read, the links to all of my social media will be in the description of the video below as well. This includes my Facebook, Twitter, Gmail, and now, of course, my Twitch account. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible, but please guys be patient, because I do get a lot of messages, so if I don't respond to you right away within like a week or two, just be a little patient. I'll get to it as soon as I can. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the description of the email or message what the name of the story is, what the category of the story is, and how you would like to be credited in the video that the story appears in. If you guys are curious about the music used in this video, links to the music and the order in which the music appears will always be in the description below the video, so you can go ahead and check that out there. Last but not least, if you guys do enjoy my content, please take a look at my Patreon, and if you feel so inclined, maybe donate like $1 or something. Every little bit helps. It'll never be necessary, but of course, it's always an option if you guys would like to support the channel. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day.